As it stands, the console war is between only really two parties, Sony and Microsoft. Nintendo are off doing their own thing, and the PC master race need not quarrel with these console folk. However, there were a few potential players from across the console generations, hoping to break into the market and take a slice of it and work their way to the top. Of course, none of them succeeded, well, because none of them actually released. There were some attempts from some well-known manufacturers, as well as a few new companies trying to break into the console market. Either way, how many of these were you actually aware of? I'm Rich from What Culture Gaming, and these are 6 unreleased video game consoles you never knew existed.
But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified. Ding, ding, done.
Number 6, the SEGA NEPTUNE. It seems odd that the now software-only SEGA were trying to rub shoulders with the console giants back in the 90s and early noughties, and to be honest, with the Mega Drive or Genesis, that is what they did. And then the 32X rolled around. It was a mushroom-shaped add-on for the Mega Drive that allowed more powerful and more interesting cartridges to be played, Knuckles Chaotix and Virtua Fighter just to name a couple of them. But Sega, already anticipating the massive success the 32X was going to bring them, started development on a console bundling the two together like a 32X/Mega Drive hybrid thing. Thus, the SEGA NEPTUNE was born, or conceptualized at least. A few prototypes were built to show off to developers and retailers, but then the 32X fell flat on its arse. The 32-bit market was already pretty busy as it was, with the likes of the Atari Jaguar, the CDO, the PlayStation, and even Sega's own Sega Saturn. The NEPTUNE was delayed 3 times, and after Sega finally realized the 32X was going absolutely nowhere, they quietly canned it. Number 5, the Atari Mirai. The unreleased Atari Mirai is definitely the most mysterious entry on this list, mainly because nobody knows a thing about it, at least there's nothing that's been really nailed down. There were, however, 2 schools of thought on what this console actually was. The first being an Atari-branded SNK Neo Geo, as the two companies were neighbours in California and struck deals before, this Atari Mirai being a result of one of these deals. Either that, or the Mirai was a console-style adaptation of their 16-bit ST computers. Atari had done this sort of thing before with their XE game system, which is essentially a console port of their 8-bit computers, so it didn't sound completely out of the question for them to do it again for their next big hitter. That's about all we know about the Atari Mirai, if any of that is actually true. However, when Atari Corporation closed their doors in 1996, a prototype of what is supposedly the Mirai was found, but it was only a shell. There was no hardware, just a shell, so we're still completely lost as to what that actually was. Number 4, the NAMCO Super System. The late 80s saw NAMCO absolutely dominating the arcade market, so big in fact they were taking a bite out of their biggest rival, Atari. However, NAMCO's arrogance at the time led to disagreements with companies like Nintendo, who were quite strict on how many games they could release for the NES per year. NAMCO took this so strangely they decided to try and support Nintendo's rivals in terms of giving them games, and even trying to enter the console market themselves. NAMCO quickly developed a 16-bit system called the Super System, which was based on their System 21 arcade hardware. It was much, much more powerful than the SNES and the Mega Drive, but just as they were about to take it to developers and retailers alike, they bottled it and decided to go and team up with Hudson Soft and NEC to try and produce a console with them. However, after seeing the arrogance Namco were displaying in the industry, Hudson Soft and NEC weren't too keen, and they shrugged them off pretty quickly, eventually releasing the Super Graphics System, which went, well, absolutely down the pan. Namco's Super System was pretty much never heard from again. Number 3, the Nintendo PlayStation. Yeah, you heard me right, the Nintendo PlayStation. Saying that, you might have already heard about this, you know, the whole Nintendo-Sony deal, and then Sony went off and made the PlayStation and completely crushed Nintendo. Yeah, if you've not heard of that, let me explain. Back in the day, Nintendo were looking at creating a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo and ended up cuddling up to Sony to get that underway. And lo and behold, the Nintendo PlayStation was born. The first actual prototype was found in 2015, but there was no CD hardware around, so was this a new console? We don't know, really. In the end, though, Sony and Nintendo were battling it out constantly as to the rights of who owned the software and who owned the hardware. In the end, they split and Sony took the hardware with them, and the Sony PlayStation was born. Nothing was ever the same. Sony tried to relaunch this Super Nintendo CD thing with Philips, but that fell through too. Well done, Sony. Number 2, the Taito Wow Wow. I'm sold already. Wow Wow? Taito, take my money. Taito were the kings of the arcade back in the day. Space Invaders. Need I say more? Space Invaders. Okay, maybe Arkanoid as well. Anywho, there was absolutely no surprise that Taito wanted to bring their arcade smashes into the living room and eventually entered the console market in 1992, which felt a bit late. Saying that, Taito were pretty ahead of the curve when it came to hardware, with their system boasting a CD-ROM drive, video streaming software, and even the ability to download games via satellite. This did sound quite expensive, and for 1992, it was, and that was ultimately the WoW's downfall. That and what would have been absolute crap download speeds for the time. Number 1, the Atari PANTHE. Oh look, it's Atari again, trying to sneak into the 16-bit party via the tiny window in the gents' toilets. The PANTHE was going to be Atari's state-of-the-art 16-bit console, boasting a Motorola 68000 chip, which you could also find in the Mega Drive, the Amiga, the Apple Macintosh, and even Atari's own ST computers. The chips in the PANTHE was what put it leagues ahead of its competition. The Otis was a 32-channel sound processor, and the Blossom was a video chip that pumped out 262,144 colors and almost limitless sprite counts. That made the PANTHE ridiculously more powerful than the SNES and the Mega Drive. However, Atari decided to can the PANTHE, not because it was expensive, I mean it sounds expensive, but obviously that wasn't the case, but because the Jaguar, which was also in development at the time, their 32-bit console, was really speeding through the production process. So they felt they'd not give the PANTHE a big enough window to justify being released. The Jaguar, however, was delayed over and over and over again, making that gap wider and wider, the perfect spot to pop out another console. The PANTHE, with its power and supposed cost-effectiveness, was a real misstep for Atari, probably one of the biggest missteps in console history. And there we have it. If you like this hardware-centric list, why not check out Josh's video on the best PS5 rumours you need to know. But if you want to see more of me and the rest of the gaming team, for a matter of fact, why not check out our series of Chatty Faces videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.